Hi everyone, thanks for joining us this evening. I'm not in my living room today. You'll notice it's a different backdrop. I'm going to see John Cale tonight at the Liverpool Phil, and they've given me a meeting room to do this Q&A from tonight. So massive thanks to my sponsors, Liverpool Philharmonic Hall, for giving me a really, really lovely quiet space to do this. I've wanted to catch up with John about his band John for ages. And it feels like a really, really timely thing to do, kind of in between albums when they've just released a brand new single as well. And we always kind of want to focus on loads and loads of different ways and routes through the industry and showing that it's not one size fits all. So it's always really, really nice when we get a band or an artist who's self-managed and kind of very like cherry picky, kind of put a team around them to kind of support the stuff that they want to do with that real DIY ethos. So without further ado, I'm going to bring John in. Hi.
Hello, Kath. How you doing?
I wasn't going to share the fact that we've just spent the last 5 minutes of you trying to wander around your flat trying to find Wi-Fi. But you know,
this is a professional setup.
Show the behind.
I've got a mic and everything.
Yeah, as I said, I've wanted to catch up with you for ages. It's just weird doing it with an audience, I guess. But yeah, like John, the band, like I first kind of came across you on social media. It must have been before I moved to Liverpool, like 2016.
So you managed to find us?
Yeah, and I think it was one of those things as well where band names do jump out at me. And I think it was just something that I found really hilarious that it was like a duo called John because you were both called John. Which was the thing we kind of want to listen to.
Reverse PR of it, really. But I think that's often the kind of humor of it. Obviously, there's a nice humor to it, but I think we're always quite quick to remind people that it's kind of a manifesto for what the band kind of was at the beginning and kind of still is, which is kind of remembering, trying to strip away the aesthetic cladding of what a band often is, and trying to remember that it's about us enjoying it and about the energy of the show rather than it being something that it is too theatrical on stage. I think the theatre of it should come from the energy and the the delivery rather than me wearing a fedora or baggy pants. So I don't know, some people like that stuff, but I think when we were starting out, which is about 10 years ago now, I think we were.
It's 2023, isn't it? Like I always kind of lose a few years. I think it's the pandemic as well that hasn't happened. It just makes it seems to have piled on a few extra years to bands where you think, oh, it doesn't really feel that long. So like, did you first start releasing in 2016? Like what was the kind of process of you and Johnny coming together?
I think we took about a year to kind of get good-ish before we played live, and we kind of we'd finished university, so it was really a case of kind of, we were the two left in London after university. We'd talked a lot about doing something musical at kind of house parties, at the pub, and it took us a kind of all of university to actually get off our backsides and do it. So when we finally got together, obviously we just got in a rehearsal room, after work, as our kind of first jobs out of university, and just started writing. And thankfully, it started working into something. It's not always a guarantee that your minds are going to match on things, but it became pretty quickly evident that we were going to that it was going to be a good thing. So we were kind of working out our movements in kind of basements of buildings that don't exist anymore in the center of London, and managed to put together a couple of early EPs. I think one single that I'm sure Jess Partridge from London in Stereo, she was an early supporter of it, so big shout out to her. And kind of got some organic plays on the BBC. I think again one of those was Jess Partridge, And yeah, we kind of begged, borrowed, and stole. I mean, a lot of people don't know, but the first stuff we did was actually recorded by my friend Ben Humphreys, who was the studio engineer for Rudimental at the time. And they were at the height of their kind of #1 boom. And so they were off touring, and we would sneak through the back door of their studio and basically use it after hours, which obviously, very different music. But, you have to find a way to kind of be resourceful.
Oh my God.
I remember I recorded the one of the kind of early tracks I'd forgotten a pair of shorts, because obviously like it's sweaty music. So I borrowed M&EK's shorts for recording, these beautiful Nigerian print shorts. So yeah, that kind of probably tells you a bit about a kind of resourceful attitude to the way the band's like started and has developed. I suppose we're still incredibly resourceful with the limited stuff we have, I guess.
So when you first started playing together, because obviously it's just the two of you, was that the ambition for the project as well, that it was going to be something just between you and Johnny, or were you just like, let's start with the two of us and see if we need to bring other people in, or like if there's any kindred spirits or whatever? Like what?
Ben, the producer, actually had rehearsed a couple of times with us, but it was evident that kind of couldn't really put that much time in. So we moved forward as two, and then quite soon afterwards, after kind of just working instrumentally, I had a past history in kind of backing vocals in like teenage bands and stuff like that. So I thought I would try that out, and kind of simultaneously Johnny, because he's very good technically with guitars, being a guitar restorer, and still does setups today for pretty much every kit. He worked out kind of playing through 2 amps with certain pedals, which basically enabled us to get a dynamic that is as loud as 5 people, arguably. So that was a pretty obviously that was a really important recognition at the time, because it kind of started to inform what it was going to sound like.
Yeah. So when did you start kind of thinking this is something that is going to go somewhere? Like, when did it start feeling serious for you? Does it ever feel serious?
I think we've always we know it's for ourselves.
Yeah.
So we've always maintained that, and that's part of what the manifesto of the name was to remind ourselves that we need to be pleasured by this, because I don't want to make stuff that I don't want to make stuff for other like, I do want to make stuff for an audience, and I do want people to enjoy it, but I need to enjoy it. I don't want to start going down any lines of changing the way I have an attitude to the music. So I think we've kept pretty steadfast along the way with that. And then obviously, there are times where things start to take more of your time. So there's more touring. Obviously, people kind of asked to be involved in some kind of way. So that's where the team started expanding, albeit still in a very kind of DIY sense, with me kind of managing the project. And we're always very keen to, it sounds really horrible, but like, vet out everyone who we work with to make sure that they understand the creative intent of the project, without them starting to think that it's something else that it isn't.
When you were in those early days, when you kind of started, like, I guess, thinking about releasing rather than like having actually like have stuff out there, and maybe you were picking up shows in different places, like, was there anybody that you had guiding you, or like did you have mates in other bands that were kind of maybe a bit ahead of you, or like what were you looking towards for, like, right, okay, we've got these tracks, we've got a live show, how are we going to do it?
I think I was lucky because I knew a few people from previous stuff. So, for example, our first ever show was put on with was it Club Fandango, which is Simon from Fierce Panda.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
quite funny because I've just read Stuart Braithwaite from Mogwai's book, and he gets a lot of mentions in it, which shows kind of how long he's been kind of working on stuff. I know he's just released a book as well, which I'm very interested to read about Fierce Panda. So
Oh,
we had a so we had a few people kind of who we knew, and then I think we just got out there and started started meeting other bands, and that led to other invites to other shows or festivals. I know we played Brixton Windmill very early on. We're never ever put in those glamorous articles about Brixton Windmill in the various broadsheet newspapers, but Tim from the Windmill was a very big support. Ended up living opposite him, so I haven't seen him in a long time, which is a shame, but just starting to learn about those touchstone venues and how important they are about as a kind of rite of passage. And I know that that's something that is being talked about a lot, especially this week with Independent Venue Week. They're really, really important places. So we need to support them.
Thank you very much. Very timely. Coming to the end of Venue Week, which felt like a month, if I'm honest. It didn't feel like a week. It was mad. It was insane. So when you were starting to kind of release those songs, like those early singles, what was the expectation that you had on them? What were you trying to do with them?
I think I was looking at trying to get them into people who the faces of people who we respect. So whether that be some other bands to for support stuff, and to certain press places, like London in Stereo at the time, who eventually gave us our first like imprint feature, which I remember was written by Gemma Samways, who's also an amazing person.
Amazing. Yeah.
So like I had learned when I was about 16 at my parents' house, like just wanting to break out of the Cotswolds and start playing shows with earlier bands. So I think I'd already started the journey before John of learning how to kind of approach people in a kind of friendly, yet kind of, just not a pushy manner, but just saying like, look here, I've got this stuff, is there any, are there any options to kind of help us? And that kind of led to, early shows at like Oxford Zodiac and stuff like that. So I'd already kind of cut my teeth realizing that, these little kind of communications and networks could help, open up boxes. So I think I just followed that model really.
Yeah. I think one of the conversations that we have all of the time with artists is that kind of like, when you are trying to get the attention of people, be it like a music writer or a blogger or a promoter, and you're like sending that email about your own band by like as you is like what that approach is. And like I get quite a lot of stuff where I get kind of just like bands will send me a press release and they won't say what they want me to do with it, like, or any other information, or just like, it's just, and it's a wasted opportunity. Like it's a massive like, are you asking me to manage you? Do you need some help? Are you after a gig? Like there's different hats that I wear, like literally, but like different hats that I wear, like, and I always just think, I think people do struggle when they are sending emails out on behalf of themselves to kind of like to like actually push themselves and promote themselves. Like what was your approach? I mean, obviously like being self-managed as well, you still have to do that to a certain extent, but like what's your approach when you are kind of like, trying to kind of win somebody over with email to kind
I think, just coming up with your, it's always important to come up with your own voice, and a kind of tone that you put through the bands across the board. And I think that works kind of for social media as well. Like, you need to work out how you go about approaching what you are and coming out with like a result that kind of pleases you. But also, obviously, when you approach people, I think just being respectful, but being incredibly clear. You know, like you say, if you're looking for a gig, then, you know, explain what you can offer, and maybe what what release plans there are, or, you know, if you're local, you know, that can really help swing it, because, you know, in terms of, you know, getting people, you know, getting bums on seats, you know, just to explain why. And, you know, even if you are out of town as well, you know, you can say, you know, we're looking to string a tour together or get out to a new place. You know, there's ways of doing things clearly. And I think I still try and I still have to do it, which is, you know, rare for other musicians. You know, there's a lot of friends of mine who, you know, definitely don't have to touch any of that. And sometimes it's quite difficult, because, again, I have multiple hats. So I'm kind of approaching someone, but also approaching someone, you know, attached to the band. So, you know, that's quite complex in itself. But at the end of the day, if no one else is going to do it, then I'm going to step up to the plate and do it. But, you know, just be respectful and give a good idea of the reasons and time, and, you know, where you are. You know, I think just clarity is always key. And if you have any key successes and stuff like that, then like you said in the press release, you know, listing the types of things that you've done. It's just a case of building that CV gradually. I mean, that's all we did, you know, and gradually things get knocked out by other better things, and it's just a steady growth. But I think most importantly, don't get too upset with knockbacks, and just keep trying. You know, I mean, look at me. I'm 10 years down the line. I've got the furrowed head. But yeah, so I don't know. I want to be clearer, but I think
no, it's cool. It kind of leads me on to my next question, which is like, what were your early milestone moments? You know, we talk about, you know, like putting like little accolades in press releases, and they get bumped out by a better one. What were was there any kind of like significant moments that stood out where it's just like, shit, that's really cool? Like, that's
well,
something.
I think obviously, you know, the BBC have played a big part in our growth. And I think those early BBC plays really made me think, oh, we can, you know, if we can be played on a national level, then that's, you know, that's amazing, and it does look good on a CV. And I think that was really good, and that was kind of regardless of social media, which I find incredibly a very tricky subject, and probably one worth kind of like discussing a bit, because, you know, it can be a real problem, especially mentally for artists, because I think there's an incredible amount of gatekeeperism around it, especially at the moment. It seems, you know, a lot more so than when we started it. It's become even more commercialized, to a point where, you know, obviously you're kind of costing out you know, audience attention for money. And I think that was kind of part of the John manifesto, was, you know, it was hard to find. So if we were going to rise up, it was based on the kind of merit of the music, rather than kind of booking on numbers, which I think was a real big thing when we first started out. And I just fear a lot for younger musicians, and, you know, and musicians our age, because, you know, it presumes that you have a level of wealth to be able to participate, and that's just a little bit worrying, really. So I don't know. I think what I want to say is just, you know, again, don't try not to worry too much about those numbers, and obviously worry about, you know, being incredibly creative and high quality about what you do, and kind of care about how it's articulated and how, I mean, I come from an arts background, so I'm always really keen about the kind of visual world that surrounds the band. And I think, yeah, make sure that you develop that voice, not like vocals, but the voice of the band and its kind of aesthetic cladding to make something interesting, more so than worrying about the kind of numbers too much.
Yeah. Do you, this is something I wanted to touch on, so I'm really pleased that you brought this up, is we always compare ourselves to other people, don't we? And like the successes of others, or
Yeah.
even if somebody who you think is going to do better than you then doesn't, like it works both ways.
Yeah.
What I want to know is, like, I guess in those early days when you first started kind of having a getting the music out into the public, and now maybe comparing to now, do you ever find yourself comparing yourselves to other bands and other artists that
I think
that
it's impossible not to, and I think that we obviously chose a very idiosyncratic route because of the early days. Like, I guess what I want to say is, like, the first album, we sent those emails around to various labels, and no one was interested to invest at that time. But rather than sit on it and keep pining away on it, we set up our own label.
Yeah.
Albeit with a bit of borrowed money. So again, I fully acknowledge there's a level of privilege there to kind of borrow a certain amount to get that first pressing in. I mean, it wasn't a big pressing by all means. I think it was only like 200 copies. But we sold those live, and then that feeds back in, and then enables you to gradually grow. But yeah, I mean, so I think there are obviously a lot of acts who work very differently and have a certain amount of investment given to them. Again, that investment is often, you often have to pay it back. There's a reason why it's called in advance. So it's not necessarily always a positive thing if someone's ploughing loads of money behind you, but and also that's a lucky few. So I want to reiterate that it's not, don't feel ashamed if that doesn't happen. Like, I think in some ways it was more beneficial to us than someone coming really early. Like, I'll be completely honest and say we probably made a lot more money than if we had gone with someone else on that first record.
I think that's really key. I think there is a feeling like when you start releasing music and it starts getting attention and you start getting good gigs and you get radio play and stuff like that, and it is like, oh, which label should we sign with, or like who would we like to work with? But it's so competitive out there, and like, label, like being on a label isn't for everyone either. Like having to kind of fit into someone else's release schedule and work to someone else's deadlines, but also having someone else at the helm of the project who obviously, like with a lot of the big indies, you get full creative control, but there's still elements where you're not in control of the budget. And it is kind of like, you are having a loan in order to put this record out. So it's really, really cool that you said, like, doing it ourselves meant that we actually kind of did get a return on our investment with that first album.
Yeah, which enabled the second album, which enabled the third album, and without that bit of brazen thought, and with, a little bit of help, which was paid back, within about 5 months,
Wow, that's pretty cool.
It would have, no, it's brilliant. I think on that note, I should probably talk and say, I know that he just liked your tweet, but Paul Riddlesworth, who runs Dips in Gold Recordings, who's a seasoned veteran, he put out a little 7-inch on 2 Pure Singles Club when that was a thing, and off the back of that, he very kindly sent me a kind of list of record shops to potentially distribute to. And I kind of put the information together and was kind of reassured because, you know, people started to take copies. So from that, I kind of started to build a relationship with shops and realized that actually, you know, obviously the shops are incredibly good at marketing, obviously.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I mean, they're great. Like, if you want to get as many voices as possible pushing a release, like a pre-order, like it is great marketing. Like, you know, it's obviously you don't make as much money as if you were selling direct to your audience, but when you're looking at like a small budget and you don't know, you haven't got money to plow into marketing and paid advertising and stuff like that, it is a really, really great network of people that
well,
are
it diversifies the income because you've got your kind of direct to customer copies anyway. And then, you know, I was, you know, had fantastic shops, you know, like Drift, Resident, Norman, Piccadilly, like Rough Trade, of course. Yeah, they all started to, you know, be interested and also, you know, put certain things out on their channels, which obviously has its own gravitas and weight to as tastemakers. So I think that was really reassuring because I started to see kind of the financial return coming from different places. So we had it, you know, we just kind of check in, but also they became personal contacts and friends. You know, you can go into shops and be like, hey, how's it going? And that's beautiful. So it's not just about the financial transaction. It also built a network, which, you know, when you're in another city, it's just nice to go and say hello to people.
Yeah, it really is. I wanted to ask about like kind of starting to reach out into other cities and building up audiences outside of like where you lived. And like, what was that process like? You know, when you started kind of like doing shows elsewhere, like how did you start building up those audiences in other cities? Was it
I think we were lucky because we started playing very early on in kind of like obviously like a kind of DIY punk, math rock, even though we not talented enough to be like in that bracket. But I think we just started meeting people at shows, and from that we kind of met a network of promoters doing kind of relatively small to the ground things. You know, for example, I think at our third show we met someone putting on a stage at Southsea Festival in Portsmouth. So that was kind of our first taste of a festival. It's you know, it's funny looking back on that list and seeing who's gone where, because it's like I found the poster the other day and it's like I think I don't really want to say the name because of the you know, the duo comparison list, but I think Slaves headlined it for like £100 cash or something like that. We probably played for free, who knows? But honestly, I think it was through getting into these venues and just chatting and saying, you know, hey guys, because obviously out of town bands were coming in and then they're putting on shows elsewhere. So yeah, I think so. And there probably was, you know, some emailing to people saying like, well, can we play, or we're trying to string a little tour together kind of thing.
So when did you start bringing more people onto the project? Because obviously, you know, like usually when I do these, I just write a little bit of timeline of releases just to kind of like, you know, so I've got a little bit of structure next to me, but I kind of lost space like on the page with all of the stuff that you've put out over like the last few years. Like you have been super prolific in those releases. Like, and what I like as well is like sometimes in between albums is a single or an EP that's like separate, which I really love. It's like it kind of gives me faith that when you start releasing albums, you don't have to kind of get on that conveyor belt of just like album and the pressure. Like I love the fact there's kind of different things sometimes in between. But like over the course of like these releases, when did you start working with other people? When did you start outsourcing certain elements?
It's quite interesting because I think it was kind of fully independent almost up until the second album. So we had no, just before that, we our wonderful radio plugger Joe, he was excited about it, and he came for a meeting in Crystal Park next to the dinosaurs, and I was very frank about it and said, look, we really don't have big budgets here, because it's our own label. We're going to be steaming full ahead with our own label, and I can't promise you too much, but Joe was amazing and kind of believed in it, and said, we'll do it for this cost, as an establishing cost. And this, I think quite a lot of people sometimes work like this, where if they believe in something, they'll happily do something for a more approachable cost, and then hopefully off the back you can reap the reward later down the line. And thanks to Joe for doing that, because I think we have managed to pay more of the full whack now. But so he came on board. I was still booking all the shows, so I booked the whole of the album tour.
That's my worst thing. Like, it's genuinely my worst. I know I've said this to you before, but oh my God, like, booking agents are just like, I think that like the hardest person to get. Like, I feel like really, and they do God's work, because I hate booking tours. I hate trying to get festival slots. I hate booking shows.
It was really hard. Kind of hilarious, because I think everyone thought we had an agent with the tour that I booked, not in a big-headed way. But
you sure enough.
Yeah. No, but everyone did. Everyone's like, who's your agent? Like, everyone was presuming, which is a nice position to be in. That's nice, but it got to the point where a promoter who worked with, Simon Bailey, who's fantastic, really good guy, he was like, this is and he was like, I'm gonna speak to someone, and basically the next day I had a meeting with Scully, our agent, who's been fantastic ever since, and he again vetted him out pretty heavily to say, you do understand how this is. And he comes from a musical background, having played in like loads of punk bands when he was a kid, so it's really good having someone who lines up eye to eye with us. So he came on actually after the second album, and has been there ever since. So and then that leads us to the third album, which I think just after that we'd signed publishing with Wipeout Limited, and again that was mainly because they're a really personable company, which kind of matches our ethos really. It wasn't I felt like someone was at the end of a phone if I need to speak to someone, which I think is a good rule of thumb. And then the third album, we had started working with our digital distributors, Singing Light, Brad, who again is fantastic. I feel like I'm just thanking loads of people, but he managed to kind of pass on the album to didn't get nominated for a Grammy, sorry. He passed the album on to Ivano, who was someone who I knew the name of, and Ivano kind of came out of the woodwork and was very interested in it. And having done 2 albums completely off our own back with with national distribution by myself, it kind of became like a really good step. It made sense to then say, okay, let's co-collaborate on this and let's push more internationally on the third one. So it's been a gradual building of the team, but everyone at each stage is someone who has shown a kind of sincere understanding of what John is and how it maybe differs from other more traditional routes.
Has there been people that have approached you that you've kind of met with, discussed stuff with, and it's just been like, no, I just don't, they don't get it. Like, that's not going to work. Because it feels like these people have kind of like come at quite fortuitous points, or when you've needed it, you know, like I've got this far. Like, I think what you said with the label was like really cool, where it's like, you know, that's kind of given us the ability to push more internationally. Because that's been the attitude when I've worked at record labels in the past as well. It's just like, that's why you'd sign to a label, is because they've got all of those kind of like that infrastructure internationally. But has there been moments where it's just like, you're like, oh, they sound interesting, let's hear them out, and then you're just like, God, no?
I think we've always obviously had the limitations of the budget in mind. So, you know, maybe there's certain press advances. Like, I mean, advances as in not advances in money, but advances in, you know, saying, do you want to work with us? And I think we've just had to be incredibly sensible about where we spend the money. And, you know, producers as well coming and asking about stuff, you know, people with kind of management who, you know, or agencies who say, oh, this person's interested in working with you. But I think you just have a reality in mind of what you've got in the tank. And you just, again, you just kind of try and make the best decisions to make that go the furthest it can. And you know, at certain points on the first and the second album, I would have loved to have been able to drop money on some press, but and when I think back, I think, why didn't I do that? And it's this privilege of hindsight, because it wasn't there. We wouldn't have had money to press the record if we hadn't have, like, if we had have spent it all on press. So there's a reality to it. You have to.
I don't think everyone sees that as well, which is really, really interesting, is that, you know, you're looking at what you've got money on to and the vital things. Like, we want a record, we need to press a record. And I feel like sometimes when, you know, I've kind of like read articles on how to do this and how to do that if you're a band, which I read shit like that all the time. Getting somebody on board to do press seems to be one of the first things that people tell. And I think being an ex like PR, like that's how I started my career. I was working with artists and bands really, really early on, but it was a totally different landscape. Like, there was loads and loads of opportunity. And I would say that artists and bands these days that are kind of like starting out, even like leading into debut album, there's no guarantee that paying somebody to do press for you is going to get you any more than what you can do yourself. All you're doing is
it's a real risk, and that's why I think I made the decision at the time to go by myself. And you know, I got lucky, you know, with, you know, nice approaches to, say, Loud and Quiet magazine, who are, you know, again, very independent, but you know, but I think put our first proper single as a kind of video premiere when they were things. So yeah, exactly. So yeah, I was like, I can get some decent results to bulk up that kind of CV anyway. We might, you know, we're probably not going to get a broadsheet with that, but you know, I think it is just a case of hustling and kind of sending it out again in a polite manner and say, look, if you want to listen, here it is, you know, and this is some of the successes that we've had already. And you know, and that worked to a degree, but I mean, we needed a record to, we understood that we needed to press the record to release the record. So we spent the money on that, and obviously now we built enough to be able to afford like a bit of press, or a cheaper reduced radio plugger, you know, back at that time. And yeah, I mean, we're still in a situation where we have to be incredibly careful about how we go about designating that budget, because we're not, you know, it's, I don't know. I think some people maybe think, you know, it's flattering that people think, you know, if you get BBC Six playlisting, like, oh, they must be like raking it in, or must be like able to drop you know, it's not the case. It's
Yeah.
and there's no guarantee, you know, like we got, you know, I don't know. The first email I got back from our radio plugger was like, yeah, no one's biting on it. Like, and I was like, well, it doesn't matter because I didn't think it was something that would be on the radio anyway. And then it was on Stephen Matt. Yeah, and then we beat the Pixies. So yeah, blowing my own trumpet again. No, it's a funny thing, but I think just making sensible decisions and also designating, like, it's probably a good point to go into the merch side of things, because that's something that's like been a very big part of how this band has grown. Yeah.
So I definitely wanted to talk about that, because that is a really, really important, like, kind of outlet for what you do, is the stuff that you put out for sale and the stuff that you design yourself as well. How did you, like, I always think merch is quite strategic, right? Like, you know, you don't just go out with everything straight away, do you? You have to kind of build up that audience of people that actually want to buy shit. Like, how is there like items that you kind of was just like, right, let's get these done, see how they go? Like, how did you build up your merch offer?
Well, I think you've got to be, you know, you've got to have a basic grasp of maths to be like, obviously t-shirts, you know, are relatively cheap to make and they bring a relatively good return. So it's a really good entry point for any young bands to kind of get a short run done and start seeing that return as an investment to come back in. Obviously, vinyl is a more significant investment off the front, but you know, obviously, it's really nice when you've got something on the merch table. So yeah, I think we did CDs very early on, which obviously have like waned and, you know, gone in fashions of popularity. But, you know, again, that was the reality of wanting to get the music out there without having the funding to go to vinyl. So it's not, you know, it's certainly not a redundant way, because it almost works like a calling card, you know. If you've got the details on the CD as well, you know, it means that people can contact you. Yeah, sometimes people just want a thing to take away from a show. So so I think we just started to realize that the importance of that kind of returning that returning investment. And now obviously it's really nice to be very specific about merchandise. So, you know, lining things up with certain releases, and maybe the design relates to the release. What other things? Like really, there was a really nice thing that I noticed, a box of run-on vinyl that didn't have sleeves. So we ended up, like, I think it was in 2020, but I basically self bootlegged with a hand painted version of the front cover, because obviously, like, bootlegs, you know, it's kind of a historical lovely thing where the image is like slightly incorrect, or so we kind of self bootlegged them, and there was only 33 of them, because that's genuinely how many we had. And yeah, I think they sold in like 3 minutes, which was really
that's so sweet. And probably to people who'd already bought it as well, right? Like, they'd already got
the I mean, some of our lovely fans are nuts in terms of, you know, the collectorism, and it's incredibly it's quite amazing to see that type of thing happen. But yeah, I just think Bandcamp obviously is an incredibly important and great tool, especially with like the community function, which is basically a kind of mailing list which is generated automatically off you know, from people who have bought off you anyway. So that's really helpful and a really good way of getting around this horrible social media gatekeeperism. I started up a mailing list as well, which I know is another really good way of kind of circumnavigating that the kind of the culture of attention, because it's kind of direct to the people who want it, which has been a nice thing.
Yeah, definitely. I want to talk about touring, how you find it, because you're such a the live element of John is so important. Like it's so kind of like the genre of music, the style of music that you make, like it is very, very in your face. Like you need to experience it, and it blows your head off. Like how when you first started touring, what was the experience like? Was it what you expected? Like how do you tour? Like can you do long runs? Do you have to break it up? Like does it?
I think I'm fine. I think I was incredibly nervous of my stamina before the tour we did with Idols in 2018 in through Europe, which is like 13 different countries, 27 shows in a month. I think.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But it was half an hour set, so it's not like
not for Idols, it was well intense.
Yeah, I mean it's tough work, but I think I'm sober now. I've been sober for almost 5 years, so that's helped me a lot personally. And obviously that is, being around booze in venues and things like that is something that takes the time to get used to, but that's been incredibly helpful for my ability to kind of one, probably keep my voice, and two, stay sane on tour. I think we're both very respectful of kind of each other's space. On tour, which is, you've just got to be you've got to be really tuned together. And just being really organized and just, I don't know, just anticipate the problem before the problem happens, But
with stopping drinking, because we talk about the music industry, like I think it is changing now, and I think it's changing for the better. Of like it used to be the case that you'd get paid in booze, like that's just a given. Is just we see more and more bands at Future Yards that are having a dry date on the tour, and they're just like, make sure there's no alcohol in the dressing room. And it's bands that I would associate with being quite boozy as well. You can see that trickling down, that culture of just like, we don't need to do this, nor should we be doing this. Like, did you find when you stopped drinking and then you were like touring and like playing shows, did you have to kind of like retrain yourself to a certain extent of how you performed?
No, I don't think I ever really drank that much because of drumming and singing. Like, I think I probably played one show where I was slightly over my limit, and it's not a nice feeling.
Not being in control.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the coordination kind of needed. I mean, Johnny still likes a few beers, and he's
got 2 hours. Get away with it.
Drinking for 2, but we're both pretty like understanding of what we need to do. And also, as you are becoming a headlining act, I think there is a real responsibility for your audience and to do a good job, because you work so hard to sell those tickets, to have a good show with other people. I wouldn't want to compromise that. And that probably sounds really anti rock and roll, but I don't care. I think it's all old. I think it's all old hat, and I think that kind of hedonism is just, I don't know. People use it to sell, and again, that's part of the manifesto of John. Is I'm not going down those lines, because I don't think it's helpful at all.
I totally agree. Like, I think it's an old trope, and it doesn't make people feel comfortable. Like,
no.
I think
but I think people use it to sell. That's the problem. Like,
I think it's respect. Like, there's a big thing about, like especially in a cost of living crisis, if people have decided that their gig that they're going to go to this month, this week, whatever, like this 6 months is your gig, like there's got to be an element of respect there, hasn't there? That you're going to do your best to
you've got to blow them away. That's the thing. You got to play every show like it's your last one. And yeah, and like, one, I wouldn't want to compromise it, but also two, I think that, yeah, that's the thing, is like, people, if that's going to be your personality and your character of your band, you know, that you're hedonists, like, I don't know, I just don't, I think you need to have a bit more, bit more to you than that.
I think there's also the matter of opportunities that are out there, because it does feel like there are loads more bands and artists than what I remember when I was like, you know, starting out as a music fan and going to gigs. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like there is so much competition and there's so much choice. And, you know, with when opportunities arise, like if you're a promoter or a festival booker or like a radio producer and you've got a slot and you've got two bands and you're like, which one do we go for? You're going to go with the one that's easier to work. If they're both sick, like if they're both great bands, you're going to go to the one that you know is going to be, they're going to be good to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And word spreads as well. Like, it's really nice when we have heard from, you know, certain venues who have really fond memories of, like, the show, because of, you know, how easy it was, you know, for them to kind of organize, because of the way that we were. Or, you know, I'm always incredibly, you know, I gain a lot of inspiration from my good friend Andrew Falkus from McCluskey, who we've supported many times, who's an incredibly kind and detailed person with how he goes about shows in terms of a responsibility for his audience and other acts. And I think as we've grown into headlining as well, making sure everyone is comfortable makes sense, because your show is going to be on time if everyone else is comfortable, and if everyone can feel, you know, feel that you're approachable and able to ask questions, you know, then it makes the whole night 100 times better. And unfortunately, I don't think everyone knows that. I'm not having any digs, but, like, I think, you know, I just like getting stuck in. You know, people can be standoffish if they want, whatever, but I feel like by not being standoffish, it makes, you know, everyone work towards a kind of collective goal.
Yeah, I'm really pleased this is where the conversation has gone, because what I wanted to kind of touch on is, I think it was your gig that I went to where there was a table for safe gigs for women.
Yeah, we've worked with them, and we're also ambassadors for My Black Dog, which is a online free chat service for those kind of negotiating mental health. So we've had numerous stalls, which is another thing that, using the band as a vehicle for certain things. We made a football kit for a community team, in Gypsy Hill, near where we were both based. So just, understanding that it can be larger, and it can be important to people, you know, beside the music is a really important thing.
Do you think more bands and artists are kind of taking more of a responsibility for their audiences and their, like, the safety of their shows and you know, the comfort of the people that are attending? Do you think there's a bit of a change there? Like,
I think, yeah, it's really nice to see, especially with venues in the UK, kind of most people have seen about the kind of famous European, kind of luxury that we are kind of bestowed with when we go to some venues over there. So it's been nice to see how venues have kind of improved their approach to kind of making people feel comfortable.
yeah.
And also just see the amount of initiatives that are going on with regards to kind of safety. And and I mean, there's been a lot of bands who we've played with who, you know, you see things called out, or, you know, we've had to split up a fight, you know, before, and stuff like that.
Would that come into the decision making of like what you do when you're touring, when you're releasing, is like, you know, that ethos, that kind of like protective element of like audiences of people, basically? Like, how conscious are you when you're making decisions about who you work with, where you play? Are you around, like, is this
There's
the right?
been a lot of things that we've had to make very tough calls on this year. I probably won't go into too much detail just because, but the level of thought that you have to go into to make sure that it feels right for the band, and right for everyone who is potentially going to come and see you. There's a lot of thought going into it, and there's a lot of thought about the kind of the awareness of diversity on the kind of nights that we try and put on, and everyone, it's that tough one, isn't it? Because it's you want it to be for the right reasons. So you don't want tokenism, but at the same time you want you want everyone to feel included, and whilst there still being a sense of quality as well. So I like to think we try and straddle that line as best as possible, and I think it's been really good that it has become a really big part of many decisions, especially like big festivals and stuff like that. Like, there's still improvement, there's still stuff to do. It's not it's not perfect, but it's better than it was.
Yeah, it's a conversation that I have with one of our team. Like, when Z, who we work with, who's our operations manager, is also in a band called Toki Horror. And I remember when we first started working together, when Future Yards was kind of just starting to be a real life thing that wasn't just four of us rattling around a big building.
I love those photos.
Scaring each other. But I remember having a conversation with Z, like, kind of quite early on, and it was kind of before I knew them that well as well. And it was just about kind of sharing some experiences that we both had in the music industry.
I'm sorry. I told you there'd be dogs.
And Z, like, the conversation that we had was just like, sometimes you feel that it's expected that in order for you to get to like the next level, you have to compromise morality to a certain extent, that you have to kind of excuse some bad behavior in order to kind of like climb the ladder, like, so to speak. And it's been like an ongoing conversation that we have quite a lot. It's just like, right, how do we show people that you don't have to do that you don't have to like pander to gatekeepers, like thinking that, in order to get out of your local scene, this particular promoter's got to book you, but they're a bad egg. Like, it's that feeling. So it brings me really, really nicely that I can kind of push a session that we're doing next week at Future Yard, which basically it's looking at the importance of identity and the art of saying no. And it's basically like thinking, right, what is your project? Who are you as a person? What do you stand for? What are your values? What's your personality? What are your goals? What is it that you want to achieve? And like, what lines don't you have to toe in order to do that? Like, how can you do it where you're not feeling like you're kind of like stripping something away from yourself in order to get to that next level? So that's what we're going to explore, which is a week on Thursday at Future Yard. So if anyone's not local to Future Yard and watching this, I'm really sorry, but it's one like for people in our kind of direct community, and I can't wait to discuss that.
Yeah, that's really
around it in conversation.
I want to come.
Yeah, exactly. We've been saying, like, should we do a session on it for ages? Because we talk about it constantly, and I think everything that you said in this session is just absolutely singing from that same hymn sheet. And like, the whole ethos of your band, and like how you've kind of decided who to work with when you've got them involved with when you needed them, and that idea that you're vetting people, you're really kind of going, is this the right move? Is this what we're doing?
Yeah, I think, it's something that I'm always questioning my approach as well. So, sometimes I'm like, oh, why is something like that? Why has something resonated more, or why has it pushed to a greater audience? So, and and it's not to say that I want it to become the biggest thing in the world, but it's also not to say that I don't want to reach more people. So I'm always kind of examining the ways in which things might, might increase, whilst also not taking away from what it is. And I think that's a hard, it's a hard line to toe, because like you said, sometimes you feel like you have to compromise, and a part of that, again, going back to that John manifesto, was the whole point is not to compromise that too much. So I think it has worked well to serve, our memories of keeping it what it is, because otherwise it can't really exist. So I don't know, it's kind of inbuilt in my head now.
The important thing on it is, as well, is like, you don't have to be over earnest about it. No one's expecting anyone to be the morality police, but it's just like, think about the decisions that you're making and why you're making them, and how that is what is that going to do for you? Like, is it actually going to do the things that you think it will, or is it just going to give you the ick, and you're going to like feel like you've done something that isn't true to you? Which I think is the important thing, is like, none of us are morality police in any of this. It's just head towards the things that you think are going to make you happy, and that are going to push your project in the right way.
Yeah, exactly. And that comes back to having developed that voice, and having developed like what you think it is. And that's, some people deliberately take a really humorous line on things, which seems to be a popular way of kind of developing that voice. Like, there's lots of bands who choose to go down almost like a comedic route, which unfortunately, like, I don't think I'm funny enough to do that. The difficult thing is if you are going to do that, to be genuinely funny, otherwise it's just going to fall flat. So that's that part of developing a voice. There's conscious decisions on which direction you kind of take it. And sometimes in pop you might go for something that's like a bit more a bit more down the nose, and again, that's not wrong. It might not be what I like, but again, it's about developing the right voice for you. And I think that's something that kind of sings through the music, the visuals, and the outwards kind of communication of the band.
Awesome. I think that's a really, really lovely point to end it on. I think there's a real kind of like a message in there. But I just want to thank you so much for your time. I don't know when we're going to be able to catch up in real life. I don't know when I'm going to see you next, but I hope it's soon.
We'll have to come to Future Yard at some point, won't we?
Yeah, not just as a designated driver.
Yeah, no, I'm sure we'll catch up in some, as you said, in some kind of metropolitan city festival, multi-venue festival, where the bands have 2 minutes to put their eyeliner on. I don't know. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. And this is a great thing that Kath does. So make sure you come back and see all of them, because she's amazing.
Oh, you sweetie. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We haven't got another online one for a couple of weeks. I don't think I've given myself a little bit of a break. I think the next one is with an amazing songwriter called Jin that I worked with like really early on in my career. And she is like, you think about like people who write songs for a living. She's an absolute blockbuster songwriter. She's got like loads of platinum cuts. Like, it's mad, to the point where she's kind of like working with emerging talents, and she set up a publishing company and a management company. Wow. So that's going to be sick. Like, yeah, I can't wait to speak to her. But yeah, the next few things are actually at Future Yard. So if you're local, then check out and come and see us. And yeah, thanks again, John. And I'll speak to you really, really soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.